Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 247 of the Healthy Skin Show. Today's episode is dedicated to helping children who are living with chronic skin rashes learn how to thrive and how we, as part of their support system, whether you are a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, uncle, close family friend, if you are helping to support a child who may be struggling with the various types of skin conditions we talk about here on the Healthy Skin Show, no matter the age, I wanted to give you some tools and some insight into how to best support children who are going through this. My guest today has a ton of experience because of her background, and I just absolutely love her approach that she takes in helping children learn to thrive. My guest today is Dr. Nicole Beurkens. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with advanced degrees in psychology, education, and nutrition, and she is considered a leading holistic child psychologist. She has dedicated her 25-year career to providing parents with research-based strategies so that they can get to the root of their children's attention, anxiety, mood, and behavior challenges, so that they can reach their highest potential. Dr. Beurkens runs a multidisciplinary evaluation and treatment clinic and is a best-selling author, published researcher, award-winning therapist, media expert, and experienced mom of 4. And I'm so grateful to have her here. So without further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Nicole. I really appreciate you showing up for the show and sharing your wisdom with our parents today who are tuning in.
Oh, such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk today about the scenario that a lot of children are left with very visible rashes that could cause kids in schools to ostracize them. And as we know, I think in being honest, we know that just from our own childhoods, a lot of times kids are not always the kindest, unfortunately. Some kids are, but not all kids are. And there's a lot of bullying that can go on. And I wanted to speak to the type of experience that the child is having and feeling, and who may be, obviously they look different. Their skin looks different. They may have periods of time where their skin looks clear and then other times it does not, and how that could be impacting them. And obviously then the parents who are trying to support their kids, and I'm sure they feel bad. So have you had experience with this in working with your clients and patients? Do you feel like this is a common experience in childhood where kids become ostracized because basically they look different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, it's a common thing, and it happens in a lot of realms. I mean, whether we're talking about any type of chronic health condition, which can be things like eczema, psoriasis, rash kinds of things. It can be kids with chronic health conditions like migraines, where they maybe miss school quite a bit. It can be kids going through various treatment for things like cancers, autoimmune disease, kids born with deformities, anybody who experiences a condition, visible or invisible, that sort of sets them apart in any way. Unfortunately, this piece can come up about how it affects their mental health, how it affects their social interactions. And school, of course, is the big playing field where this all plays out. Not just in school, certainly can be in extracurriculars and in other places in the community, but schools where kids are spending the majority of their time. And so it's not uncommon for me to work with children who, whether they're willing to talk about it and disclose it initially or not, are dealing with quite a bit of anxiety or depression or loneliness or bullying or those kinds of things as a result of living with and managing this health situation, and other kids not understanding or not being empathic or supportive about it. So yeah, it's something that I think every kid who has one of these kinds of issues deals with at one point or another in the course of their development.
This episode is brought to you by my skincare line, Dermaquell. The beauty of these skincare products are that they are especially crafted for those struggling with chronic skin rash issues based on my research and clinical experience from my private practice. They focus on organic ingredients that are clean like zinc, aloe, and hemp oil that support and calm rashed, dry, angry skin. There's no unnecessary chemicals or additives that can further dry out your skin or mess with your hormones. And I'm so excited for you to add these creams into your routine. Check them out at quellshop.com and use the coupon code GET15OFF to get 15% off your first order. I'll put a link in the description below. And now let's jump back to the video. And do you think that children who are experiencing this, either some sort of being ostracized, being bullied, being picked on and made fun of, do you feel like this is something that parents should worry about? Because I imagine, like, I was bullied a lot as a kid, and I know that that really was stressful for my mother. She was very upset about that. And it's hard, I think, for parent, like, it's not like you can just like walk into school and tell everybody, hey, stop making fun of my kid. Like, you don't have the power to do that per se. And then there could be repercussions to that, even saying anything. So how does that dynamic come in with like how the parent feels about this particular situation? Because obviously we're talking to adults, and most of the people listening to this show are probably parents or even grandparents.
That's right. And, you know, it impacts us as parents or family members significantly because, of course, we don't want to see our child struggling socially or having any of these issues. And so it's tough. But it is something that we play a big role as parents or caregivers in being proactive about and being able to help mitigate the effects of this. One of the good things that's happened over the last decade or so, for sure, is there's much more awareness around bullying, around the impact of bullying, around the need for schools and community organizations, to be doing education and work around that. So that's helpful. But I think, a few things around this for, people who are listening who are parents or family members. Sometimes there's this idea that if a child has something going on health-wise, or it even can be, something like a learning disability, it can be any kind of difference. A lot of parents or caregivers feel like, well, best not to say anything about it. Like, let's just try to keep it a secret or keep it on the down low. Like, let's just not make a big deal about it because then my kid's going to feel different or singled out. Here's the thing to understand about that. Kids already know when they're different. They don't need us to say anything about it to know. So it's a real mistake that I see parents and caregivers making, and even teachers and others who are involved in kids' lives, to have this idea that, well, let's just not talk about it because we don't want to upset them or we don't want to make them feel different. Kids, even really young kids, preschool age kids, know that they have a difference, right? They know I have a blotchy rash all over my skin that other kids don't have, or they know, my hair doesn't grow like everybody else's and I don't look the same, or, I have patches on parts of my body that don't have the same pigment as the rest of my body, or they know I have all these medications that I take, all these doctor's appointments, all these times that I miss school. They already know. So we actually do a disservice to them by not being open and talking about it and addressing these issues and talking with and educating the people that are in school with them, educating other kids about it. So I think that's one of the big misconceptions. And if there's one thing that people take from this conversation, I would want it to be that the more knowledge and education and information we give not only our children who are affected by these things, but the teachers, the kids, the other people that they're spending time around, the better. Because when children have information, number one, that's empowering for the child who has the condition. It's very empowering, even from a young age, for them to understand, what is the name of my condition? What is the prognosis for this? Why do I do these treatments? What's going on with that? That's empowering for them, which helps them to then manage comments and things that kids or adults might make. So empowering them with knowledge, but also, the other people that they're spending time with. I'm a big proponent of parents or practitioners going into the class and talking about these things, especially the bigger the issue or the disability is. To talk about it and say, oh, we all have differences. Let's talk about what's going on with our friend, Johnny here, and have him share some of that. Because the miraculous thing, and it's so contradictory to what most adults think, we think, oh, don't talk about it or we're going to get teased. Actually, the opposite is true. When we give school-age children, preschool all the way through high school, when we give them knowledge and information, they are much more accepting and much more tolerant. Where bullying really stems from and the ostracizing stems from is this sort of fear of, this is different, this is uncomfortable, I don't know what this is. When we give kids knowledge and information, suddenly it makes sense to them and they're like, oh, that's what's going on. Even to the point of with visible rashes and things, or limb deformities, any of those kinds of things. We have to understand, when we don't explain to children, especially younger children, they make up all kinds of stories in their head about, I might catch that if I play tag, with Sally on the playground. What if I start to have that, right? And so that's where some of the ostracizing, the bullying comes in. So that's why it's so important that we are giving kids knowledge and information, and that breaks down those barriers. It allows for a lot of empathy, inclusion, acceptance, and ultimately allows the kids who have these conditions to more seamlessly integrate into the social mix of what's going on in school, in sports, in other extracurriculars, and it makes it an easier road for them.
I could see that. I could definitely see that, because I recognize the stories, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, the stories that people would say about me and what was going on with me when I was a kid. Yeah. For a parent or a grandparent, is there a way, or maybe a criteria of red flags that you might see in your child to know, if they're not telling you that there's something wrong, but maybe you see it coming out in other ways, that there could be something, signs that there could be an issue at school? Is there something that parents and grandparents and, as you say, caregivers could look for that might be the moment where you're like, hey, maybe we do not need to start talking about this?
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that, because the reality is that most children, the vast majority, will not initiate telling a parent, a teacher, a caregiver that it's going on, because they are ashamed, because they're embarrassed, because they don't know how to talk about that. So it is up to us as the adults in these kids' lives to raise these issues and to watch for the signs. And there are several signs that kids maybe are experiencing bullying, or that they're being ostracized, or that there's teasing, or, just things like that going on. Any change from their norm in terms of behavioral patterns. That can be noticing behavioral pattern changes in terms of how they manage frustrations. It's usually a pretty easygoing kid who suddenly it's really prickly, kind of blowing up at things a lot or melting down a lot. Oh, that's really different. That's out of character for them, right? Kids who are suddenly spending a lot more time alone and isolated, not spending as much time with family, not wanting to do things with friends or leave the house to do things, that's another big one. Significant mood changes, noticing that, wow, pretty grumpy, pretty irritable, that's unusual for them. Anxieties, especially things like nighttime fears, anxieties of not wanting to be away from parents. And again, if that's outside the norm for them, that's kind of one of those red flags that says, something's going on here that we need to delve into. And of course, any changes in physical complaints. A kid who is suddenly having a lot more complaints of, I don't want to go to school, my stomach hurts, or I have a headache, or can you come pick me up? Those are indications that, something's probably going on in that environment that is uncomfortable for them, that they're trying to avoid. And any change in things like eating habits, sleeping habits, things like that, those can all be signs in children that something is going on here emotionally that we want to delve into and understand more about. And I do think it's important, even if you're not noticing any of those kinds of signs, to periodically raise it with kids. I try to do that as a healthcare practitioner. I'll periodically bring it up with my patients of, hey, I was just talking to another patient yesterday, and he was telling me, he's really had some issues with bullying in the lunchroom, like kids not wanting to sit next to him. And I'm just curious, has that ever happened to you? Have you ever seen that happen to other kids? I'll just sort of find a roundabout way. With teenagers or things, I'll often bring up, I read a really interesting article the other day about the percentage of kids who experience, bullying, or, kids who have the condition that you have and how hard that is socially. And, I'm just wondering, we haven't ever talked about that. I wonder, do you agree with what that article says? And I'll find these roundabout ways to bring that up, to give them an opportunity to engage and share around that, because you often do need to find those back doors. If you say point blank to a kid, so are you being bullied? Honestly, the statistics show most of them, even if they are, they will deny it.
I probably did.
And so that's right. We need to find these opportunities to bring it up in a way that gives them the opportunity to tiptoe into that and share a bit, to give us a better window into what is actually going on for them.
And how is, just as a parent, the thing is, there's no handbook. And not all of us have the same capacity for empathy, and not everybody has skills to be able to sit there and hold space for someone without, getting angry. Because obviously I think it's a natural parental reaction when you hear that your child is being bullied to get angry, and you're not angry at your kid, but they might not realize that. So do you have any introductory tips of how to hold space for your child, whether they're a preschooler or a high schooler, to make them feel safe and that it's okay to share these things? And I guess too, just acknowledging that you as a parent or a caregiver have your own emotions going on at the same time as well, that you have to also process.
Such a good point, because so often the reasons that kids don't bring these things to us is because we have a history of making it about us when they do. And that is across the board, whether it's bullying, whether it's talking about, whatever. Oftentimes kids don't bring it to us because we get triggered with our own past histories, our own experiences. We get flooded with our own emotions, and then we react to their situation out of our own stuff. So this is really key to parenting in general, and particularly when we're talking about these kinds of situations. The key is that we need to be aware of and manage our own emotions and behaviors, and realize that when our child is bringing something to us, our job is to keep breathing, notice and acknowledge for ourselves our own feelings, but keep our feelings and our experience of it separate from what is going on with them. And so we want to do a lot more listening than talking, especially initially. Tell me more. Tell me more about that. Often a kid will say one thing, and before we know it, and I've done this as a parent, we're now doing all this talking back at them, and it may not even really be relevant to what they needed from us, right? A lot of us, as parents, even as professionals working with kids, very much want to fix things right away. So a kid brings something to us like, there's a few kids on the bus who are being really mean and calling me names. And we immediately, go into, oh my gosh, well, tell me who it is. And that's not okay. And I'm going to call the school. And did you talk to the bus driver? And like, we go into this fixing mode because it's so painful for us to sit there with the feeling that somebody's doing something mean to our baby, right? But really what we need to do is listen. So a kid says, oh, there's these couple kids that are really mean on the bus. Deep breath. Oh, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. And we kind of tell me more about that. Oh, I want to hear more about that. How are you feeling about that? What do you want to have happen? What do you think would help? And really making sure that we are understanding how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and why they're bringing it to us. A lot of times, kids are bringing those things to us not because they want us to jump in and like play superhero and call everybody's mom and fix it. They're telling us because they need us to be with them in how they're feeling about it. They need to not be alone in how they're feeling.
Wow. That's a powerful statement, Dr. Nicole. That is like really powerful to say that like your child is asking you to be with them in how they feel right now.
That's right. That's right. And be with them in how they feel. And that's ultimately what builds resilience. Is for them to know that I don't have to be alone in these feelings. However I'm feeling about this is okay. And I can come to you with that and you will acknowledge that feeling, not tell me it's right, wrong, or whatever, but just accept it and be in it with me without a need to make it go away by fixing it. That's ultimately how we teach kids not to be resilient, is by they tell us, I'm feeling sad or angry, whatever, when we go, well, let me make that go away right now. Let me call Johnny's mom. Let me call the school. Let me, you don't have to go back, whatever. Well, that's teaching them to avoid any and all uncomfortable feelings, which does not lead them to be resilient. So if we want kids to become resilient, and let's face it, for children with chronic health conditions, particularly visible ones, even with the best of care, they're going to have time periods throughout their life, even as adults, where they're going to experience some of this. The more we can build emotional resilience in them as kids, the better they're going to be able to do with that as adults. And that means listening, keeping our own emotions out of it as much as we can, being with them in what they're feeling, and then partnering with them in coming up with a plan of what would be helpful. And sometimes what would be helpful is just working with them on some coping strategies. And sometimes what would be helpful is going in and meeting with the school, or providing some informational materials to a coach who's working with them, or coming in and doing a presentation for the class, or talking with the best friend's mom about, the reality of the condition. Sometimes those things would be helpful. But we want to make sure that we're understanding what our kid is really communicating and what they really need, and then responding out of that and not out of our own stuff.
Wow. My goodness, that's a lot. That could be a lot for an adult. I will acknowledge that. I don't have children, but I could imagine from being an aunt that if my niece came to me and told me she was being bullied, my natural response would be to like storm to the school and talk to somebody and call this parent and be that like person to stop it. But what you're saying does make sense if I look at it from like my recollection of how I felt as a child being in that position.
That's right. And sometimes the worst thing we can do, depending on the age and the situation, is jump in there and go all mama bear or whatever on it, when really the kid's like, I think I can handle this. And I will tell you, probably 7 out of 10 times in the kids that I work with at the clinic, when they've got a situation going on, what they want is the support around how they're feeling. They may want some help with strategizing and problem solving, but they want to handle it, or they at least want to try to handle it first before getting adults involved. So we talk about, what does that look like? What do you do when somebody's calling you names? What do you do when somebody's spreading rumors about you? What do you do when, somebody's leaving you out of things? How do you respond to that? What can you say? When should you just walk away away? When is it important to tell an adult what's going on? And we give them the tools and the skills. And then we see how that goes. And if it's still continuing as a problem and they're doing the right things and still other kids are managing themselves poorly and behaving inappropriately, then we say to our kid, it's time for me now to step in and to help you more directly with this. And how I usually frame that is, this is as much for you as it is for this other kid, because kids who bully are kids who have needs too. And so me going to the school or talking to your coach or your 4-H club leader or your friend's mom or whatever is as much about helping this other kid as it is you.
That is very powerful. I'm wondering too, like, because this is a whole part of it, but then also just knowing that you have a clinic and that you work with children, do you think that it's, and obviously you probably do, but I think there's a stigma still about having a kid go to therapy depending on their age. Do you feel like therapy could also be helpful on a child's on their journey? I will share that I started seeing a counselor when I was about 14, and it was actually I just went to the counselor, and I didn't go to my parents. I just went to the counselor at my high school and started that, and it was for me very helpful to process what was happening to me. But do you think for children, like, how can that be helpful for them, having maybe someone else to talk to who isn't their parent? And could that also be beneficial for the parents, that there's somebody else who has maybe more skills than they do in helping a child process? Because this can also be traumatic for a kid to go through.
I think that therapy can be incredibly beneficial for a lot of kids for a lot of reasons. And as you said, there can be stigma around it. There's still a stigma for adults. Especially, for kids, parents worry about, what does it say about my kid that they're seeing a therapist? Here's my general take on therapy. Every human being benefits from therapy at some point in their life journey. It's part of what makes me a good therapist, is being in my own therapy, right? So luckily, and I think especially over the last couple of years, with everything that has gone on, the stigma around mental health in general and therapy is reducing. But it still is an issue, particularly for kids. And with kids, we run into the issue too of parents who are like, well, he doesn't want to go, or, she won't talk to somebody. And what I always say is, a good therapist who knows how to work with children will be able to overcome that, right? As the parent, you say, I understand you don't want to go, and I respect your feelings about that. It's new, it's different, you don't know what to expect, but we're going to get started with this. We're going to give it a few sessions and see. As a parent, sometimes you need to make that call, right? That this is what's right for my child right now. And understanding that a skilled therapist who knows how to work with children will be able to build rapport, will be able to move that process along in a way that then they will engage in and benefit from. And I think especially for kids with chronic health issues, and it's funny because I actually was having a conversation about this exact thing with a mom 2 days ago here at the clinic, about the importance of having at least a few sessions at some point when it's developmentally appropriate, which depending on the kid could be maybe middle elementary school, at some point through early high school. But somewhere in there, I think it's really important for a kid with any kind of chronic illness, disability, whatever it might be, to have a few sessions with a therapist who understands their condition or their needs and issues, and who can provide some good education around that, to empower the child with that education, and help them think about and work through maybe some of the things they've already encountered or some of the things they're likely to encounter. And to work on some healthy coping skills development for that. The more proactive we can be, the better. What often happens is kids run into major issues, and then a parent is like, oh, we're going to need to get some counseling. And certainly that's beneficial. But I think if you have a child with a chronic need or disability, the more you can be proactive of, okay, we haven't encountered a huge thing yet, but my kid's in 7th grade now, high school's coming, like I see some of these dynamics starting, let's do some sessions. And it doesn't have to be, people often think like, oh, my kid's going to be in therapy for years. Well, sometimes, depending, but most of the time with these kinds of issues, what we're talking about is a handful of sessions. It's a handful of sessions, and it's more education and skill building than anything. Let's talk about how this impacts you. What do you understand about this? What questions do you have? This is the thing that parents are shocked at when I do these kinds of sessions with kids. Parents will say, oh, I don't think he has any questions about his condition or issue. Like, he's never asked me. And I'm like, guaranteed he does. And sure enough, couple sessions in, starts coming out, and parents they're like, I had no idea, like, why didn't he ask me these questions? Or why didn't he ever ask? Like, every doctor's appointment we go to, they say, do you have any questions? And she always says no. And it's like, well, of course kids are going to say that. And them saying they don't have any questions about their condition, their treatment, their future, doesn't mean they don't have them. And it doesn't mean they're not creating 18,000 stories in their mind, most of which are not accurate, about what this means for them. And so having some therapy appointments to explore some of that and pull some of that out, the earlier we can correct misunderstandings, the earlier we can give them accurate stories, the more well-adjusted they're going to be. And from a mental health standpoint too, the less anxiety they're going to have, the less they're going to be prone to depression. But it really requires us putting ourselves in the minds of children and realizing that as children, they create all kinds of things. Oh, I have, these rashes, or I've got this thing, that flares. Even elementary age kids will formulate stories around, I better not ever have children because something bad will happen to them, or I won't ever be able to have children, or nobody will ever marry me, or I'm going to die before I get to high school. I mean, these are the things that kids think about. And a parent would go, well, I mean, you just have chronic eczema, like you're not going to die from it. But the thing is, putting ourselves in the minds of children, in the absence of good information and support around that, they don't understand these things the same way that we do. And so they create scary scenarios or scary stories. So I think this is why it's important, when we can be proactive about it, to give them some opportunity to work through that with someone who's not a parent.
Yeah,
and who's not the doctor.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah. I wish that I had somebody like you when I was a kid. Because you're right, you do create and concoct these ideas about what your life is going to look like down the road that are not really true, but you carry them with you, and then all of your experiences start to reinforce what you think. And that might not provide, I will probably acknowledge, after listening to you talk about this, I've probably avoided certain things because I decided early on that because of my earlier experiences in life and how I was so different and bullied, that I didn't deserve or shouldn't engage in certain things. And I'm just having that realization now at almost 42, listening to you talk about this. So parents, it does, I can acknowledge looking back that, wow, I wish that I had had somebody like you. So you have a clinic and you have a podcast. So I think that's the cool thing is that moms and dads and grandparents and caregivers can actually learn more from you. I have followed Dr. Nicole for a while, and I've sent things that she's shared on Instagram to like my sister and other friends who are parents. And I just thought she was the perfect person to have these conversations with, because I acknowledge I'm not a kid and this show isn't necessarily for kids, but I know a lot of parents listen to this for their children. And she really has a deep understanding of what it's like to work with children who are going through things. So can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast and your practice?
Yeah, so my podcast is called The Better Behavior Show. We cover all kinds of topics related to parenting, related to a wide range of diagnoses, challenges, issues. And we're almost 200 episodes in, so we've got a huge bank of resources and episodes now for people, several around even the types of topics that are coming up in our conversation today. So you can find the Better Behavior Show on any of your, podcast players. It's also on my website, drbeurkens.com. And I'm pretty active on Instagram primarily, Facebook a bit too, but really I've got a great community of parents and professionals on Instagram, great conversations. I try to post there regularly, and all the podcasts and sort of I do like summary posts of each of them, and so those can be found there, and it's just at Dr. Nicole Beurkens. And then my clinic is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we work with families from all over the world, doing various types of therapies, different types of consultations, and really are focused on children from infancy through young adulthood. With a wide range of developmental disorders, mental health issues, chronic illness kinds of things. So that's really what we specialize in. And, some patients we work with, in sort of a typical therapy model of evaluation and ongoing treatment. And then lots of parents, especially, people who connect through podcasts and on social media and stuff like that, just, even a one-time consultation just to give some suggestions or things. And I have a wonderful team of people that I'm very blessed to work with at my clinic. So, you can find that through my website, drbeurkens.com.
Perfect.
As well.
And we'll link everything up in the show notes. So it's super easy for everybody listening to this to find you and connect with you. And I would highly encourage everyone, I don't have children, like I said, and I still follow Dr. Nicole, and I found it helpful. Someone will share with me they're struggling with something, and I'll be like, oh, I just saw an episode that she shared from her podcast or something that she shared, and I'll send it to them because I there's no manual to be a parent. There just isn't.
There is no manual.
And I think it's harder for parents. I could imagine just looking back and seeing how hard my mom tried for me. All the things that she went through before the internet age and getting brochures from different places and trying to mail away and request information. True. I mean, she tried, and I'll give that to her. I mean, moms and grandmoms and parents are wonderful. They really do a lot. And dads, I don't want to forget our dads and granddads out there and everybody else who's really trying to support kids as best as possible. So I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing this wisdom. And I hope that we can have another conversation with you here on the show about all these topics, because I think it's so important that kids know they're not alone, that they're not the things that they're being called and like you said, the stories that we make up about ourselves at a young age. And how do we help parents support their children better so that they grow up and can live a joy-filled, wonderful life as best as possible. And so thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
I really wanted to have someone like Dr. Beurkens on the show for a long time, so I'm grateful that she was able to make the time to be here. If you'd love to check out the resources for this episode, you can head on over to skinterrupt.com/247. And if you've got questions or comments, you can leave them there so we can keep the conversation going. And then take a moment to share this interview with parents out there who are struggling to know how to best support their child living with chronic skin rashes. This could mean a lot to a parent or caregiver who's really not sure what to do. And last but not least, take a moment to rate and review The Healthy Skin Show. If you haven't done so yet, share what you love about the show, what you get from the show, how it has helped you. It would mean so much. And then make a point to subscribe. That way you never miss a weekly dose of inspiration, client stories, research, and alternative strategies to help you rebuild healthy skin. And then let's connect over on Instagram. I'm at Jennifer Fugo. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.